What do you do when you buy a short-term rental, but all of a sudden the city that you purchased it in says cease and desist? Maybe you bought a property and ran the numbers and are getting ready to enjoy a 22% return, and all of a sudden you realize that you're now going to be taxed as a commercial property, thus increasing your tax bill and devastating your bottom line with a $9,000 new charge that wipes out your profit for the year. Well, these are just a few problems the current short-term rental owners and established markets have experienced, and if you're thinking, oh shucks, well this is just for the big cities, then think again. Emerging markets are on the radar as well, and this is why zoning and advocacy training for real estate agents and investors is so important, and it's why it's been a cornerstone of my real estate network and training for the past 2 decades, because our industry is not going anywhere. It's here to stay, and this education is necessary because we can count on one hand the number of smart, dedicated professionals who actually take the time to learn it. And if you're working with an agent trained by me, then I can promise you not just the best in the cockpit, but also in the community as well. My goal here is not to freak you out, but to encourage you because there is help out there. You just have to know where to find it. People like Alexa Nota, co-founder of Rent Responsibly, an organization dedicated to educating and resourcing short-term rental owners with problems that they didn't know that they might have. And it's here to help you when a problem arises. Alexa is cool, calm, and collected, and smart, and I hope you take her tactical advice here, or at least put it in your backpack for future use. You'll learn a lot here on this podcast because there's a lot here. I'm confident, though, that the free market will prevail, just like it did in the past, because if the horse lobbyists had won way back then, I wouldn't be driving that Ford F-150 parked out front. I hope you like this discussion with Alexa, and I hope you can see that there's resources now all over the country. Listen in. I think you'll like what she has to say. Well, hi, Alexa. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you betcha. You know, when I wrote the second edition of my book, I thought it was very important to include a chapter on advocacy. And because I think it was one thing that people weren't paying attention to when they should have way back when, 10, 15 years ago. But now it's all in our faces all the time. And usually without a crusader in somebody's town or somebody who's, the Paul Revere of somebody's locale, letting people know what's coming down the pipeline, most entrepreneurs tend to go on their merry way and just try to go make money. But the success in the short-term rental industry has created a lot of knee-jerk reactions in political subdivisions, be it like a fire district or a school district or a zoning district. So when I met you at the Skift conference in New York last year, I was really, really excited because I felt like I would have a chance to really nerd out in a cool way with somebody else, and have an advocacy conversation. And I mean that in a really positive way because I consider myself a nerd, because I really think that people who are focused on this kind of behavior and helping investors or short-term rental owners and any real property owner in this way know what their rights are is a hero in my book. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and to have this conversation. And so let me know, how did you get started in the advocacy world? Tell me that story.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to go all the way back to how I got started in the industry, period, because if you were back then predicting what I end up doing what I do now, it'd be a crazy, weird thought. I started in the industry as the director of marketing for a property management company out on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It is a long time second home traditional vacation rental market. So that was my first introduction to the industry. From there, really got to know a lot. But my roots are in journalism. So I left that company and began working for VRM Intel. It's a vacation rental management industry publication. And the biggest part of my job I was just thrown right into was covering regulations. And so this is now, 2018. And at the time, the big issues in most places were nuisance, primarily party house issues. So through the course of my coverage, I met Dave Krauss, who is the co-founder of NoiseAware, then the CEO, and he was a source on a lot of my stories. So we talk quite often about noise in particular, but also just nuisance in general and how that plays into these regulatory discussions that were happening at the time. Around then, we both started to realize the more and more these cities were having these conversations was if there isn't an organized host voice or property manager coalition or any sort of organization on the ground in an area, the regulations would just get rammed through. They'd be overly restrictive or an outright ban. And that would be it for short-term rentals in that market. And that's not sustainable for our industry, but it's also not sustainable for those communities either.
Nor
So
is it legal or a good way to govern, right?
exactly. And so Dave and I, on these little parallel paths, kind of realized like, this needs to exist in every single area. Fast forward a year or two, the short-term rental ordinance discussion came to where I live, which is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's a little college town at the
Go
time.
Tar Heels.
Yes. There were less than 300 STRs at the time. And so, like many people, I thought that discussion will never come here. My town will never think about this. It's not a thing. But as we've
Famous
all learned
last words, right?
well, I learned the lesson the hard way. And the hotel lobby here, despite that teeny number of properties, still wanted to get everybody banned. And here, I'm a voter and I'm a citizen and I pay taxes. And so I could get involved in the regulatory process in a way that I couldn't before when I was just covering it as a journalist. So I got involved. I started a local STRA. I co-chaired the task force on short-term rentals with my town, learned a lot more. And even with the experience and the knowledge that I had, found out that, okay, the reason there aren't more of these in other areas is because it's actually a lot of work and a lot of volunteer time that we are asking somebody to spend on top of having a family and a life and a job or a business. It's really hard to ask people to spend what we like to call the 25th hour of their day doing advocacy and alliance building and things like that. So Dave was realizing very similar things on his path. At the end of 2019, we decided that we need to make community building, alliance building a lot easier for our industry, or we don't really have a chance. So we founded Rent Responsibly, and that's what we do.
Wow, that's so amazing, because like I wish I knew you years ago, because I also realized it the hard way. If you are a real estate professional in the short-term rental industry and are tired of inaccurate data, underwriting, or simply uncertain about the changes in your market, then you need to know that just like the changes that occurred in the auto industry a few years ago, the availability of information is making your customers smarter than you. They are searching for accurate data to make good buying decisions, and now you can give them the data that they want for free when you subscribe to InvestTR by Vrolio, a new data platform by real estate pros for real estate pros. The only way to stay ahead of the curve and to prove your value is to become a data-backed agent with InvestTR by Vrolio, the only B2B solution for real estate professionals in the short-term rental space. InvestTR by Vrolio can be white-labeled with your logo so that you can brand your expertise while you privatize every lead. Vrolio has data scientists on staff and scrubs the data so that you can be sure you are making clean decisions with good underwriting rather than scraped piles of trash, which frankly is your only other option. Cocktails and Dreams wants to support your new way of selling that's both cutting edge and more accurate. You no longer have to hope that you are making the right decisions, because you can be certain that Vrolio is the gold standard in the STR data industry, and to prove it to you, we're going to give you a 30-day money-back guarantee to the software, and we're going to coach you to get even better results that I had when I launched my business. And after 17 years in the STR industry, this is the best that I've seen yet. And I'll be there to personally help coach you to where you want to go. Click the link in the show description for a quick trip to register for a free demo, and we'll see you there. So in 2017, 2018, there was a bill that was circulated in the Missouri legislature that was, it was very confusing. It was backed by VRBO and Airbnb, and they had a lot of control at the state level just because of how large those platforms are. But what we found was that large platforms really only care about large platforms and not necessarily the people who subscribe to those platforms when it comes to property rights. Now, there are departments within those organizations that do help educate their customer, but we found that the bill was being circulated to quote unquote regulate short-term rentals. And it included a ban window in the very beginning. And it was like, hey, you state and local governments, you guys can put a ban together really quick, but past this level, there will be no bans. And we thought, why don't we just ban the ban? If we're really going to be going out for short-term rental owners, why don't we ban the ban? Why don't we have discussions around whether or not we should tax these commercial or residential. And why don't we talk about how these regulations should be narrowly tailored and should show a compelling governmental interest and should be regulated by the least restrictive means. Because what we found, especially in our area, is there was a massive knee-jerk reaction. There was such a success and influx of short-term rental owners who, by the way, have a really bad PR campaign. So the only thing that anybody hears about positively about the short-term rental industry was the things that you were reporting on for years, right? The party, the crazy thing, the squatter, all of these things. And the short-term rental industry became the redheaded stepchild of the news media, which got kicked out and beat like an ugly duck for years when nobody paid attention to actually how the short-term rental industry was helping the average middle-class person gain income, was helping single moms create jobs so they could be home with their children, was giving the renter the ability to, that transient traveler, the ability to save money and still go on vacation, which they desperately need by not staying in a hotel, by being able to cook all the meals inside their home and pour a bowl of cereal for their kids every morning instead of having to go out and pay $75 at IHOP. I mean, here we have an industry that's being created that's helping the middle class. And the first thing that happens is we have extremely wealthy hotel owners that form this association with the sole purpose to hire lobbyists and to stop all of this, or quote unquote, level the playing field, which is what we got. And for 2 years, we fought at the state level, and I had dragged hundreds of people into this industry and felt like I needed to do something about it. And I got a wake-up call in how, I guess I should say, a group of people with no advocacy, how they can really get thrown under the bus hard. Mm-hmm. So thank you for doing what you do and for staying on the front lines.
Well, back at you. I mean, Missouri is definitely better for having you there and willing to do that.
Well, it's like you said, it's that 25th hour. And I'm at the point in my career where I need a 26th and 27th hour in my day. So to kind of give you an idea of what we did here in Missouri is I formed a 501c6 advocacy group with the hope of eventually having a political action committee attached to it. And so I was able to get that group started. We fought for 2 years until things kind of calmed down. And actually, we just formed a board of directors now and have a crusader. I'm definitely not a crusader. I can provide leadership where none exists, but I really have too many other things that I'm focusing on right now. But I was able to find somebody who has a large property management company in our local area who's very involved with VRMA, is great at grant writing, has more time than me to do that. And so she became the president. I stepped down. So I still help in an advisory capacity, but we definitely have that association now, and it's starting to gain members and gain traction. It's not easy to do. Like you said, it takes a lot of time, effort, energy, finances, member benefits. Have you found this? Because this is one of the massive challenges that I found. First of all, it's hard to get people to pay attention and take notice of what's happening to their own property. Mm-hmm. Second of all, when you do let them know what's happening, it's almost like, well, it hasn't got to me yet, right? I know it's a problem. I don't have time, but it hasn't got to me yet. When they get the statement in the mail that their taxes are going to go up 700%, then you start getting calls. Then you start to get buy-in. And it's unfortunate because at that time, it's almost too late.
Oh, it's definitely too late. And yes, we see that problem everywhere, every location, every market has that issue. And thankfully, where you are, you have an association that they can reach out to, but that is not the case in most of the country still. What I've seen as probably one of my most favorite trends in this entire industry has been seeing that be basically the default situation 5, 6, 7 years ago. Nobody would do anything. Maybe you'd have people saying, oh yeah, we should be paying attention to this, or we should be involved in advocacy. Oh yes, advocacy is great. I support it. But until there was a bill on the table or an ordinance in discussion, would they wake up and actually do anything about it? And by that point, it's too late. Minds are made up. The ordinance is written. It just now needs to go through a formal process to be enacted. That's really all that's left. The buildup to that was the year, 2 years, 3 years prior, where nobody was doing anything or paying attention, or addressing the challenges that eventually trigger some sort of regulation. What we are seeing now is there's finally a lot more proactive momentum with alliances and advocacy in general. A lot of people are getting involved or wanting to start groups before there is a regulatory need for one. We're even now getting outreach from people who haven't bought their first short-term rental property, wanting to just go ahead and start a group in their area because they know it's needed. And not necessarily just for some future advocacy need, but just because being a steward of your community is the right thing to do. It's good for your community and it protects the investment that you're making in that community.
I'm glad to see that. That's good news.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I give my team a lot of credit for that. But there are a few, but very powerful people in this industry who have stood up and beat that drum for so long. The VRMA is certainly one of those organizations. They have been pounding the idea of advocacy into their members and just the country generally for years. There are a number of local advocates that have been doing this and not only leading their markets, but telling other markets they need to do it as well, like Julie Marks in Vermont, Bruce Hoban in Palm Springs, Ricky Cortez in the Poconos. These are simply individuals who care and who are doing this and seeing the benefits of it, that are out there championing advocacy and just paying attention and being conscientious in everything that you do. And it's finally paying off.
Good. It's what's interesting is that there's no real reward right out of the gate. It truly is an act of service. And I talk about crusaders, meaning you have to have a certain level of passion to cause you to take action when nobody else is, to have the courage to go out front and to lead an organization and to potentially get cut off at the knees because you have no support, right? And you're just one random voice. I've been that for so long. And I've tried really, really hard to merge with other associations. For example, we attempted to educate the Missouri Association of Realtors and our local association of realtors back when this was happening, because real estate agents are some of the most influential people in their community. They're connected with so many third-party vendors that all will live or die by the income streams that comes in from tourism. I tried to get my state legislators to understand that we're bringing investors in who are revitalizing the properties in our area. They're spending an average of $20,000 to remodel these places, and they're going to our local stores to furnish these things and to buy lamps, and they're going to our local Target and buying blenders and cups and glasses, and that sales tax helps our area. And so, Branson, Missouri experienced 400% increase in regulation from 2009 to 2017, including our properties having to be retrofitted with sprinkler systems, right? So when I talked about these regulations should show a compelling governmental interest first, any government entity should say, well, here's the reason why we need to add this regulation. We've seen 4 people pass away due to fires and the inability to get out. They just say, no, we just need this regulation. So that's the most restrictive means, to take a property owner and force them to spend $30,000 to retrofit their property with a sprinkler system. Oh, and by the way, they have to dig into the ground in front of the house and put in a 4-inch main instead of a 2-inch main, and pay a $900 connection fee because the property is a quote unquote commercial. We've had regulations from that to outright ban scares to outright moratoriums on new applications because the planning and zoning was too full of applications and had to restructure their zoning guidelines. We've had our assessor move everything from residential to a hybridized version of commercial taxation to 100% taxation. We've been so involved with the state tax commission and all of these things from A to B, just to try to show up and provide a service for a transient guest that the hotel industry is not providing. So I agree in regulation. If we don't have regulation, then we lose all the buffalo, right? The railroad comes through, the buffalo are getting in the way, let's just shoot all the buffalo. Obviously, that's a bad way to govern. It's a bad way to regulate. Regulation is necessary for those kinds of reasons. But when we see lobbyists change what happens on Main Street because somebody just wants to invest in an area and use a property themselves 4 weeks out of the year and then offer it through the sharing economy to other transient guests that come to the neighborhood, it's really, really hard because the most restrictive means makes it hard on everybody, including the government, because ultimately what they wind up with is lawsuits because a private citizen has to use the legal system to pay to stand up for their own rights, which were given to them by their state and national constitutions, right? Isn't that crazy? This tribal form of government, when the least restrictive means would be homeowner. You have a need to disclose to your guests that there is no sprinkler system. And if your guest is okay with that and you're okay with that, then by all means, disclose the fact that there's no sprinkler system. That's the least restrictive means. There's no need for a compelling governmental interest to get involved in how things are regulated because there is no rampant fires happening in condo complexes all around Branson, Missouri, right? So it created this frustration level in me that caused me to charge forward. And I did have sort of a ragtag band of people that really helped out, but advocacy is a lonely place. How long have you been doing your advocacy work, Alexa?
I was really active with the Chapel Hill STRA from, I want to say 2019 through 2021 or 22 when the regulations ultimately passed and then were being put into effect, and needed to make sure that my members knew exactly how to be compliant with the new local rules. It's been a little quiet since then. But with Rent Responsibly, we work directly with alliances every day. So we are constantly interacting with groups that are going through different parts of this cycle. We know regulations are going to come up again at some point. It's a when, not an if. So we follow them through the cycle of, okay, we've got to firefight this ordinance over here or this state bill, or we're trying to push something to pass that we want to pass. But then the rest of the time we've got to do what we like to call fireproofing. And that is making sure we're educating hosts on how to host responsibly, how to rent responsibly. We are making sure they know how to stay in compliance with whatever local rules are in place so that we don't end up in a worse situation, a year or two from now.
Right.
We provide a lot of marketing advice. How do you, make your listing perform extremely well in 2024? How do you meet the travel trends that are happening now so that your business can continue to grow and flourish and be sustainable? We do a number of different things with different groups, but there's always work to be done.
I like the fact that you named the organization Rent Responsibly because it puts the responsibility on the actual property owner, which is great because I think we should be self-regulated. Because if we're not self-regulated, ultimately what we get is government regulation. But if we create our own standards and hold ourselves and all of our colleagues accountable to that, then there's really an opportunity to create a standout group in the industry that cares about what they're doing, it cares about being good hosts. And what is it? The saying goes, the love of money is the root of all evil. And, money is not the root of all evil, but the love of money is the root of all evil. And so we saw a lot of people come into this industry because they wanted to make money, right? Hey, there's gold in them, our hills, right? And so here they come with all their forks and pickaxes. And of course, all the real estate agents made a lot of money. We did. I've got real estate teams across the country that are short-term rental experts. So we received a lot of the business came in and we helped people find great properties. So, my organization is sell responsibly. Make sure you sell somebody a property that's going to make money so that they can come back and become a raving fan, right? Let's help these people move forward. And then part of that became know your local regulations, be sure you don't guide somebody in the wrong direction. I really appreciate the fact that you're asking this person to be a good host and not just be a good income earner. Because that's part of it. I think a lot of people now are leaving the industry because they didn't realize they had to be good hosts.
Right. Well, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. If you're a good host, That includes making sure you're compliant, tax paying, you're a good neighbor, and you're providing a great experience to your guests, and your property is safe and well cared for. All of those things protect your investment and help your investment perform better. So it's a win-win in my mind. I know asking somebody to participate in advocacy or do all these extra things feels like additional work or additional expenses that are optional, but they're not. If you think about advocacy in particular as a form of insurance, which I like to, like, you hope you never have to use your insurance policy, but you better have an insurance policy just in case. If you think of it that way, it's a measure of protecting your investment. And again, with all the other things combined, ultimately making more on it or helping it stick around for the long term.
So as you begin to guide people, let's start here. How does somebody typically get introduced to you or your organization? Obviously, something's happened. They're now searching for help. Tell us that process. How does, if somebody has their hand up and they're desperately looking for help, how do they connect with you? And then how does your organization help them?
Great question. The way that people find Rent Responsibly is typically through some sort of advocacy need. We do cover a lot more than just advocacy, but that's usually the front door that people walk through when they come in contact with us. They typically arrive on our website looking for guidance on advocacy in general. How do I address regulations? How do I fight a policy or something like that? Sometimes they reach out to us or come to our site specifically for help starting a local group. They've already come to the realization that a local alliance is needed and they need help starting one. As you discovered, which most advocates discover, doing something like this by yourself is incredibly difficult. So they come to us for help because that's the help that we provide. Typically what we do is we set up, some free consultation calls and just tell us what's going on. Most everybody meets with Dana, our director of community development, and she can provide some advice right there on the spot for how to triage something and then continue a relationship with tons of resources on starting an advocacy group. Usually our first recommendation is to get other people to help you, because if you're doing it by yourself forever, you're going to burn out. You're going to feel like you're out there on a ledge, and it's just a really uncomfortable place to be. So we have tons of resources and guidance for that. If you've got a specific challenge you're working through, she's got office hours that you can go and chat with other people and see what they're doing. And then we have a bunch of other ongoing things that they could take advantage of as well, depending on their needs. We have a number of free resources in our new Rent Responsibly network. It's a private online community. There are tons of resources in there for advocacy and alliance leadership. You can also come to leader seminar or any number of other things. If your group gets to a point where you want some professional level help, we also have pro services that an alliance could use. So let's say you've grown, you really want to become a sophisticated member dues based organization. We've got services and technology that can help you do that.
Software that allows you to manage your members, reach out to them, billing, that sort of a thing.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that we started all of that while the heat was on. But then when things kind of quieted down, it was hard to really get people to stay members. So it seems like having peers that you could talk to determine the library of value that you do bring to people when it's wartime or peacetime. Like when it's peacetime, that's a great time to build a PR campaign.
Exactly.
And also to develop resources and to have a, well, for example, I taught all of the agents that I trained for the past decade and a half to become the zoning expert in their area, because everyone will see you as incredibly valuable. And so there's an opportunity in every state of the union for a good, educated real estate agent that's smart, dedicated, and professional, that cares about their client above and beyond making money, that wants that person to be well educated. Most real estate agents are politically active anyway because they pay those RPAC dues. A lot of people that don't know what RPAC is, it's that Realtor Political Action Committee. In most states of the union, the real estate agents are the largest trade organization in the state and a very powerful lobby. The problem is is you can't rely on that organization because there are hotel owners and short-term rental owners in there. But what you can do with your 501c6 or your advocacy group is you can partner with that organization to help with messaging, to get messaging out to a larger group. Or if you are politically savvy, there are ways within that group to make headway. But it's also a great way for somebody to start a political career. Because if you wanted to just be a political career and take on one of the top 3 topics, it could be very polarizing and could end your career very quickly. But if private property rights is something that you care deeply about, it's something that everybody needs, because it might be happening to the short-term rental owners now, but as soon as they start taxing your service, now they're going to start taxing long-term rentals, and now they're going to start taxing something else next. So if they're trying to get short-term rental owners commercial property tax classification, so you're taxed at 30% instead of 11%, the same thing's going to happen to long-term rentals, right? Over time, it stands to reason, because if making money becomes the determining factor of what's commercial, not state statute, then eventually we're going to run into problems. And I don't know who runs the government. It's a lot of times people who either want significance, people who got picked on at school, it seems like, right? Or people that have no regard for human beings whatsoever. And they try to tax their way out of problems when you simply can't. You've got to communicate your way out of problems. And I never, not once, so correct me if I'm wrong, and I would love to be wrong. Like, please tell me a location that you have found that actually said, hey, all of you people that hate short-term rentals and all of you people who love short-term rentals, let's get together and have a discussion about how we can make policy in our town that's going to be the example for everybody else. Have you seen anything like that anywhere?
You know, it's funny. I think every single town or city thinks that they are this completely unique snowflake that is completely different from anywhere else ever.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, there are differences, sure, but for the most part, they're not that unique. And you tend to see cities and towns going through the motions with that kind of stuff. They will put together a task force, they'll run things through their planning commission and things like that. But it all depends on who's on city council and who's ultimately making that vote. If they don't like short-term rentals, their decision's made. It does not matter what conversation's happening. I will say, I only know this because I was so deeply involved in the process, but Chapel Hill, where I live, did seem to really take in fact over anecdotes of people who were just upset about not having a true neighbor next door. And they came out with a policy that wasn't perfect, but it was at least well informed, and they did make an effort to make it fair. Again, it was not perfect, but I don't think any ordinance ever will be. So for that first advocacy effort, I was pretty happy with the outcome. So I'll give my own town a lot of credit on that side.
If you are a governor of any kind and you don't like short-term rentals and you're creating policy based on your opinion, not based on the written A to Z policy for public hearings, for creating legislation or creating policy in your area, which doesn't happen 99% of the time. Most of the counties and the cities and municipalities don't even follow their own rules. They are just as passionate about their hatred or disgust for short-term rentals as a property owner is for their private property rights. And I've seen more violations in that world than I have in any other. And it's hard because what's at stake is the act of governing itself. And it just really got me fired up. And there's only 2 ways to go. You can get involved and you can help, or you can give up and try a different industry. And what happens is all of the good leaders move to a different industry. And I've seen a huge lack of leadership in advocacy in short-term rentals, except for people like yourself and people like the few people that you've mentioned that have stuck around for whatever reason. Maybe their income is dependent on it, or maybe they are those crusaders who are just passionate about it.
Yeah.
But there needs to be, in the short-term rental world, as organized as it is for real estate agents, there needs to be a national chapter state chapters and local chapters that all support each other from the top down. And I don't know anybody who is heading us in that direction except for Rent Responsibly.
Mhm.
So you are doing something that is a precursor and incredibly necessary to get us to the level that we need to get
Yeah.
in order to be able for people who buy this type of real estate to have the rights they already have, right?
Yeah.
But have to fight for legally.
Right. I love that you brought up the National Association of Realtors, as we look at them as a model often. What a lot of people I think tend to forget, or maybe not think as much about as we do, because like you said, we're kind of nerds for this stuff, is that real estate as an industry has been around for a really long time. So have short-term rentals, so have other things. We like to use the analogy of the auto industry, which if you look at timelines between the National Association of Realtors and the history of automobile regulations, it's a very, very similar path and something that we see repeated throughout history. If you think back to the early 1900s, right, you had Henry Ford's assembly line all of a sudden make it possible for cars to be produced at this really high rate and at affordable prices, accessible for a lot of people to get a car who previously couldn't. So all of a sudden you go from having these dirt roads with horses and buggies become full of people driving these brand new cars. Roads were not built for them. And so it became a mess. You had traffic jams. There were no crosswalks and stoplights. So it was just a mess. People were getting hurt. Cars were flipping over. It was just a nightmare. And so of course, as you know, somebody who manages a city, that's a problem that you've got to solve. And what they did early on was try to apply the rules of horses and buggies, if you think about hotels, to cars, and would put in place things like the maximum speed limit for a car was 5 miles per hour, 15 miles per hour or something, where cars didn't actually function at that speed. They would stall out and then you'd be right back where you started with traffic jams and all these issues. So in the early years, in the early 1900s, let's say 20s, 30s, what happened was these auto enthusiast clubs, these motor clubs got together and they were like, if we are going to be able to continue driving because we love driving, we're going to have to work with our local governments to find a system that works. And so it was through that collaboration and that process over the following decades, almost an entire century of work, we got stoplights and crosswalks and driver's ed and driver's licenses and insurance requirements and all those things that we consider normal and fine now. They're the systems that allow good drivers to drive as much as they want, drive any car that they want, as long as they're good and responsible. At the same time, we also have a system that our cities need to be able to get bad drivers off the road or people with unsafe cars off the road. Today, if you have a drunk driver, they don't ban driving. That's not even a question. It's just, oh, we need to go after that one driver with these penalties and get them off the road. So the short-term rental industry is in exactly that same spot right now, but we don't have a century to figure it out. We need to get these enthusiast clubs, aka alliances, together as quickly as possible and working together with their local governments on rules that make sense. Not more, not less. Just the things that help good operators continue to host.
What a great analogy.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about that is that while I was at Jefferson City, the state capital of Missouri, trying to wait at a public hearing to be heard for in front of a committee of state legislators, somebody was there from Tesla, and they were trying to continue their right of direct to consumer sales because that's the model that Tesla was using to sell cars. And who was there to stop them but the Missouri Association of Car Dealer Owners? And I didn't even know there was an association like that. But apparently there is. And apparently everybody needs an association with a lobbyist. Otherwise, you're like a one-eyed cat watching two mouse holes. And that's actually a term that the state legislator who did write our bill, Keith Frederick, who did actually care about Missouri property owners. That's what he said. He goes, this is really difficult for me when everybody else in the house here, just they either don't care or they don't understand how important this is. And without organization and without crusaders and without models, we're not going to make it. So let me ask you this. How have you seen things change since you got started in advocacy to now? Do we have hope? What are you seeing? Positive things, or are you still seeing a lot of dumpster fires?
I mean, there are definitely some dumpster fires. There's a whole part of this that's, I was going to say uncontrollable, but that's not true. So every few years, your council turns over, right? So and your state legislature as well. So even if you make progress with people in office, their terms will eventually end. Kind of start over with whoever does get elected. And you can also play a role in those elections and get people into the seats that are a little more open-minded. But outside of that, I've seen a ton of positive momentum inside the industry. I was talking earlier about how we're now seeing people just raise their hand to go ahead and start a group even before they buy a property, because they know it's important and it's necessary and it's needed and all of those things. It's kind of a mixed bag on local regulatory outcome side. I think that necessity of some people needing to go through the legal system to challenge an ordinance after it's passed, that's still, I don't want to say the preferred tool, but it's still an important and necessary tool. But we are starting to see more sophistication in how organizations are coming together. So we still see a lot of starting with local, connecting local, dealing with your town council, your city council, only in your market. But we are also seeing a lot more networking of these groups come together and some structures forming at the state level if there wasn't already something there. So that tells me that not only are people embracing advocacy and having an association in general as important and necessary, but they're getting more sophisticated and learning from other groups and combining their resources. And that is the foundation for even bigger successes and more momentum on the regulatory side going forward.
I've seen a lot of support for, I should say, against bans. What I'm finding in the research that I do is that a ban on short-term rentals is a little bit of a violation of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which is a governmental taking or a partial taking. Obviously, the government's not taking your property, but they're taking a portion of your right that comes with the bundle of rights when we as Americans own real estate. If they take a portion of those rights without due compensation, that's a governmental taking. And so a ban on your ability to rent the property for 30 days or less without a compelling governmental interest could be considered a taking. And I've seen some Supreme Courts kick it back out. I've seen a lot of these decisions overturned. But it seems like zoning is still the weapon of choice for most areas. We can still zone certain areas for residential use or non-residential use. So the classification of short-term rentals as residential or commercial is all over the place, region to region. And it's a shame because it's either commercial or it's residential. And in Missouri, the language that was used is that it's a residential rental dwelling, but yet ultimately, it's still region by region, county by county determines whether or not it's commercial or not. So like, for example, when one new assessor comes in and says, oh, well, I don't like short-term rentals, these are now all 100% commercial. There's a myriad of trickle-down effects that happen there. Well, one, all of a sudden the school districts now get incredibly well funded by all of this money coming in from short-term rental owners, and they're never going to want that taken away, right? That stack of money is going to be really difficult to take away because they're going to find a way to spend it. Schools need it desperately. Do short-term rental owners need to bear the burden of the difference between school districts' needs, financial needs, and what they don't have and what they do have? I don't necessarily think so. But this is what's happening, and the fact that there is no state, guidance or state doctrine that says these are residential. What happens is it leaves most of the when you get a tax bill and you don't agree with it, you have to go to a board of adjustment, right? That's usually 3 people in your town that say, okay, we're going to listen to you. You don't agree with our assessor. We're going to make a decision on whether or not you're right or the assessor is right, without any kind of direction from the state taxes, commission. And I'm speaking firsthand. I don't know if you can tell this or not, but you can show up with a stack of state statutes and explain them to people who sell insurance for a living until they get completely blank faced, eyes roll back in their head, can't wait to get home and smoke a brisket or whatever it is they came in on a Saturday to try to help you sort through. They're just ultimately going to support their county assessor. And it's good that communities come together to support each other in that way. But the individual homeowner that's really fighting for their rights has an uphill battle still, and we still have a lot of work to do. So let me ask you this. How have you seen the industry itself mature, just in your opinion and observations, the short-term rental industry? What's changed? How have you seen it go from an adolescent or go from an infant to an adolescent?
I think that's a good way of phrasing it. I think from my experience, I've seen the industry finally start to embrace advocacy as just a part of doing business. Of course, we still have a long way to go with that, but that flywheel is now spinning. And it's thanks to people like you, not just for leading the advocacy charge, but for talking about it on your podcast, that I think is the trend that is just in front of me the most, and where I think we have the most room to grow if you're talking about going from an adolescent to an adult. I think our industry has made bigger strides when it comes to technology. Back when I started in 2015, which is not that long ago,
Mm-hmm.
were not a ton of great property management software. Smart home stuff was becoming more widely adopted. But now if you go to the VRMA vendor floor or any of these other conferences, there's incredible technology out there. There's, of course, things like Noise Aware to help you keep noise or make sure you're aware of noise at your property.
Yeah.
There are some great guest communication tools. There's all sorts of things out there that can help you not only be responsible and do everything you're supposed to do as an owner or a host, but a ton of really cool stuff to help you grow your investment, which is really exciting.
So what kind of resources can people find on rentresponsibly.org to help start them in the process of becoming an advocate?
On rentresponsibly.org, there's a number of advocacy related resources for things that I consider, or I've seen a lot, to be questions that people have, but they're not comfortable asking. Like, how do I actually go testify in City Hall or in the state capitol? How do I talk to the media about short-term rentals? So there's a number of that foundational 101 level advocacy stuff, and then a number of things to help you grow from there. There's guides, there's templates, there's video replays of past events, all sorts of stuff. The best stuff is inside the new Rent Responsibly network. So if you go to network.rentresponsibly.org, you can sign up for free. Inside there are even more of all of those things, as well as a whole library of stuff to help you grow your business and rent responsibly. We just published a whole series on investing responsibly. There's other things in there like how to prevent hosts' worst nightmares like squatting and things like that. Anybody can go and join and get access to all of that. All of those things, in our opinion, are related to advocacy. Some are really preventative. Some are reactive, or how do I handle a situation once it's occurring? But it's all really beneficial and a good return on your investment.
Well, thanks for doing that. Is there anything else that you want to say to somebody who might be listening, who's wanting to get into short-term rentals or who's already in short-term rentals, or just anything else, maybe a question that I didn't ask or that's a sort of burning in your mind that you wanted to communicate to everybody?
I would tell everybody to, number one, go and see if there's an alliance in your area. If you go to rentresponsibly.org, there's a big directory that we have on there of a ton of alliances around the country. Go find one near you or in your state and join that, become a part of it. If there isn't one, consider starting one. We have created all the things that we wish we had when we started, just like you were saying, the things that you wish you had when you were doing it solo.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of stuff there that we can help you with. So don't be afraid of starting a local group. Or if you want to get one started, but not necessarily commit the same amount of time that we see typical alliance founders or board members committing, there are still a number of other ways that you can support local advocacy efforts. There's time, which I mentioned. Please donate to your group, become a member and donate, do both. Your money covers things that all of those volunteer hours can't. If you have connections in your network, we call these the 5 T's of advocacy, by the way: time, treasure, ties. If you have people in your network who can influence a policy decision, or anything like that, get them involved, fill them in on what's going on, get them to connect with the alliance. Just get them to be a part of the conversation. Last one is, or second to last one, is talent. If you have a particular special skill, like you're a great graphic designer or you love using social media, consider becoming a volunteer for your association or alliance in that one specific way, because there are a lot of special skills beyond just general volunteering that these groups need. And the last thing is testimony. Anytime there is an opportunity to submit a comment on anything, whether it's a public comment session, a survey, a letter to the editor, take that opportunity to use your voice, because the more people we get participating and speaking up and showing the truth, the real people behind short-term rentals, like you were talking about earlier, the more we can start to change that public narrative and the minds of the people making those policies.
Well, I agree, because what's at stake is the lack of this inventory for the traveler who desperately needs to be refreshed. I've always said that people aren't going to stop going on vacation. They're just going to vacation smarter. They're going to pool their resources. They're going to continue to vacation with family, because it's one of those things that a person cannot do without. It's what you have to do when you can't take what you're taking any longer. You go take a vacation. And it allows us to be our best selves. I love the short-term rental industry because it is the gateway to financial freedom for a lot of people, and it has been for me. What that ultimately means is that if I have more margin in my life, I can become a better dad. I can listen to my kids more. I'm not stressed out. I can become a better husband, a better community member, and just overall live the rest of my years with a little bit of margin, which is an empty hand, which can catch all of the things that I'm trying to balance. I've said many times before that a balance is an illusion. It just doesn't exist. And so what we need more than balance right now is margin. And so we need margin for our crusaders. We need margin for entrepreneurs. And if you have experienced the benefits of short-term rentals right now, then you have an obligation right now to join the fight and participate in a way that this industry has served you. So I challenge you, if you were listening to this podcast and you own a short-term rental and you haven't got involved in some way, it is your duty and it is your right to participate, just like our founding fathers came before us and created avenues of freedom. If you are not participating just in your local politics in general, then you are wasting your God-given American rights. It's time for you to become a card-carrying citizen of your family, of your town, of your community. And it's why when I rewrote my book and did a second edition, I added an advocacy chapter in there because it's so important. And the reason why I did that was so that you folks listening wouldn't make the same mistakes that I made, because I waited to get involved for too long. And that made me have to shout. It made me have to be passionate. And it's very easy when you behave in that manner to be isolated, to be separated, and to be marginalized because you're so emotional. So my goal with writing that chapter was to give you a step-by-step guide on how to interact with your local community and your local politicians to have a far more effective approach than I did when I first got started. In fact, Keith Frederick, who I referenced, I actually had a state legislator write a chapter, the last chapter in that book, to provide just that level of care and concern for you folks that do want to make a difference. So Alexa, I salute you. I truly do. People like you are celebrities to me. You are the people that are doing things that are far greater than what I think how most people spend their time. So I just really value you and your organization. And we're going to put links to your organization in the show notes. Is there anything else that we can do for you?
No, I just want to thank you for all that you're doing, not just here on this podcast to educate people about investing in really smart and responsible ways, but for all of the volunteer time you've already put into leading these advocacy efforts. We exist because we know that's not easy, and it creates a lot of sacrifice and all these other things. And you have set an incredible example for everybody to follow. And I imagine you started with no previous experience in advocacy.
No.
So you're showing people that you do not have to have any experience just to get started. You just have to start. So thank you.
True. Great point. Well, thanks again. And I appreciate your time today. And we'll look forward to staying in touch with Rent Responsibly. Well, a big thank you for listening to the end of our podcast. I know your time is valuable, and I hope you got a few takeaways that are going to help you get a greater return on that time. I know you will. And if you did enjoy it, I'd sure appreciate a share or a comment. Feel free to subscribe for instant access to new episodes and offers. There's also a ton of free content and ways to learn more and engage more at WorleyRealEstateNetwork.com. Until then, we'll continue to bring you recipes for success and real stories from real people who, like you, are living out your divine purpose. And hey, God loves you. No matter what happens, don't give up.